r/AskReddit. Teachers of Reddit, what's the saddest thing you've ever found out about a student? I had this student, Miles, who was a real trial. He started out very smarmy and attention needy, and as a new teacher in a difficult class I struggled to give it to him, so he acted out probably for attention from me or his peers. He was in 7th grade and alternated between acting extremely mature, talking about sex, cursing, acting like a little gangster, and being very immature compared to his peers. He'd draw little kid cartoons, discuss Santa, and beg to do classroom chores. What he didn't do was work. When I held my first parent-teacher conference it all became clear. His grandma who raised him had died last year and his mom was in and out of jail. His dad was only allowed supervised visits and flaked out a lot. His guardian was an elderly lady who had agreed to take care of Miles and his brother until the mom got out of prison. Mom never showed up and didn't want either boy. The guardian has recently been diagnosed with cancer and didn't have the energy to control or handle the hurt, grieving middle schooler. She said things such as, "I'm old and sick. I wasn't supposed to be raising him. If it weren't for his grandma I would wash my hands. He's no good and I can't do anything for him. If I'm not doing right by him, take him. This is all I can do." It was eye-opening and sad. I wish I could say that I saved Miles, or that I changed his life. When he was sent to another school, our school was grade-based, he came up and hugged me and thanked me, the teacher he gave hell to, every day, and it felt like a minor victory. Honestly though, it wasn't good enough. I couldn't do enough. I'm no longer a teacher and this is a big reason why. My feelings of inadequacy. Substitute teacher here. Was in a classroom for a week and a half. 3rd grade. It was already kind of in flux. I was subbing for their long-term sub because their teacher had a baby, which meant it was super hectic, and it had like 3 kids with IEPs who needed constant one-on-one attention. Right. But it was a great class. They were all smart, just off routine and bored. There was this one kid, though. He's a brilliant kid. Smartest but also smart. Smart like we had an agreement that he could work ahead during math, so he wouldn't distract all the kids around him by talking once he finished early. He was a jerk and kind of a bully, but it was clearly coming from a place of frustration. The behavioral specialist told me that if I needed to keep him in line, he was deathly afraid of getting a note sent home to his parents, so I could use that as a threat. Not really my style, though. Seemed a bit cruel, so that didn't come up. I had to punish him a couple times because yeah, he had a ton of behaviors, but there were only 2 major incidents. First incident, he was upset with a kid who wasn't moving as quickly as he was and started to berate him, so he had to sit out at recess with me and have a talk about understanding how other people felt. We got to just talking, and he told me about his dad, who he clearly adores, and I wound up introducing the kiddo to Calvin and Hobbes, because he reminded me of Calvin. They even look alike. Second one, though. Damn. He would not listen during math. Refused to. Distracted the rest of the kids. Called out during the lesson. And eventually hyped himself up enough that he called me something disrespectful, not mean-spirited, but inappropriate, along the lines of Miss Poop or something similarly stupid, and I sent him to the office to get his work done in private. I made the mistake of mentioning that he'd used disrespectful language. Kid comes back in half an hour in absolute tears. The behavioral specialist is with him. She takes me aside and asks me if I'm sure I really want to continue with filing a report, because his dad really kicks his ass when he gets sent home with one. I explained that no, this kid and I had an understanding. He just needed to cool down, and I did not intend to send a report home, but a lot of the stuff he told me just clicked. This wasn't a spanking, oh my mom whoops my ass type thing. The kid was crying silently at his desk, clearly trying to hold it back, utterly terrified. I sent her away, sat down with him, and told him that short of his actually harming another student he would not have a note sent home while I was teaching one of his classes. That yes, he needed to fix his behavior, but a note home about a stupid name was not worth endangering his well-being. And I went home. and slowly put together that the teachers know this child is being beaten, but the behavioral specialist still told me I could use that abuse as a tool. I have no idea if there's a CPS case or not against this family. I'm worried reporting it myself could interrupt a case they already have against them, and anyway I have no real information, the kid's first name and class at school. That's it. I haven't had another job at that school yet, but I'm going to check in and get more information the next time I'm there. I got home and cried. He has his problems, but I'd adopt that kid in a second. He deserves so much better than that. Edit. Keep the amazing advice coming, guys. I'm at the school soon, and I want to get more information from / on the behavior specialist, but after that I'm going to report this. I was working in a severely handicapped classroom once as a long-term substitute for an aide. We had this one kid who I will call Johnny. He was in 4th grade and couldn't communicate by speaking, plus he was really developmentally behind. He would kind of stare off into space with a blank expression on his face for most of the day, but for this classroom he was very functional. When I first started, if you were walking with him the moment you turned your head, he instinctively knew and took off running. It was like his personal joke on you, because you would have to chase after him like an idiot while other classes are going on. Well, after a while I was put in charge of taking him out to the swing set. He loved going with me because he was a big heavy set kid and all the female teachers were not strong enough to give him a good push. And boy, did I push him. I mean, I almost had this kid going inverted on his swing. It scared the hell out of me, but he loved it. Through sign language he would beg me to go higher and higher. For a good couple of months we did this every day, multiple times a day, with him signing higher, higher, and me yelling, hold on, hold on. I'm convinced it was the greatest thrill of his life thus far. Then one day we were getting ready to go home, and he found out that it was my last day. We were watching a movie. He did his blank stare straight ahead, but this time, tears were pouring down his cheeks. He couldn't talk, but was kind of moaning. One of the senior aides suggested I sit next to him to calm him down. So I did. We just sat there watching the movie. Toward the end he reached over and patted me on the knee a few times. I looked over, and he was just staring blankly ahead without any expression on his face, but I knew what he was trying to convey to me. That is the day that I found out that Johnny was one of my best friends and I would probably never see him again. My first year teaching was in an inner city middle school. About 8 weeks into the school year, I confiscated a notebook from a 6th grader after she smacked another student over the head with it. After school that day, I received a phone call and needed to jot down a note. I opened the spiral notebook to a random blank page and wrote down my note, then ripped out the page. I turned around in my chair and graded papers for a while, and then turned back to take a drink. I was leaned back in my chair, taking a long pull of coke, and letting my eyes wander about until they landed on the word pussy written in the notebook. I was so startled that I nearly choked on my coke, so it took a minute for me to regain my composure, sit up and take a good look at the page. It was a note to the student's best friend, explaining in great detail about how her own grandmother performed oral sex on her quite often, and how great it felt, and how she, the student, would do it to her best friend as soon as they had a chance. Yes, I called the authorities. No, they didn't take the child out of the home. I teach in high school. For background, I was sitting at my computer one day placing grades in or something, and overheard a few students chatting about what they thought they were getting for Christmas. Everyone was excitedly chatting about what they might get, and this one girl never really spoke up. Finally someone asked her what she was getting, and she looked at them and said nothing. My parents have been working like crazy to make ends meet, and they would just all have some type of meal together on Christmas. The other kids were shocked. She was so content listening to the other girls talk about what they might get, kind of like living through them almost. The girls changed topics and talked about something else after that. At lunch I ran out to the local Walmart and grabbed a Visa gift card. Got a card and wrote an anonymous thought you could use this kind of thing in the card. I ran it to my principal and explained the situation. The principal called her down and gave her the card. She never knew who did it. I noticed when we returned to school she was rocking some new shirts and what looked like jewelry. The same group of girls noticed and asked her about it, to which she excitedly said she was surprised with them. I teach English in a middle school in China, and one of the grade 7, 12-13 years old girls I teach I'm 90% sure has ADHD or something similar. However, being this is a public school and knowledge about mental issues is a lot lower here, she is just labeled as naughty, a distraction, a bad student etc, and because of the large class sizes people just choose to ignore her rather than find out why she is like this. She is quite clever, but the teachers rarely give her the time of day or chance to answer questions. I often see her standing outside the classroom looking really sad. When I see her at playtime, recess etc, she is often alone. She is basically extremely misunderstood. Anyway, I always turn up to the classes early and spoke briefly to her. The next class, a week later, she gave me a note saying that she wants to answer more questions and to pick her if she puts her hand up. So I obliged her by doing this. She gave me another note saying she wants me to read her comic. I had a look and I guess I was one of the first people to, as it made her so happy. She's not naughty, she just wants people to look at the comics she has drawn. I'm late to the party, so no one will ever see this, but my mom taught 2nd grade in the inner city for 27 years. When she began teaching, the neighborhood was part of very poor, predominantly Polish immigrants. When she retired, the community had transitioned through at least 2 other ethnicities and settled into mostly Hispanic. Every year she would have a project child. When I was younger I didn't really get it, but as I got older she would let me see a little more into their lives. I will never forget taking a Christmas dinner and extra food to last over Christmas break to one of her students' homes. There was a 6-foot wide hole in the floor. If you didn't know it was there, when you stepped through the front door you would fall into the basement. The house had no running water and they couldn't afford a plumber to fix it, and the landlord was the one who put the hole in the floor to fix the plumbing, but conveniently never got around to finish the job. I was in 4th grade when the twins had my mom for 2nd. They would come over every Monday and Wednesday evening for dinner, a bath, and to attend a wanna on Wednesdays. The boys were super smart and their little sister would run circles around them. She went Ivy League. One twin went to Michigan and is a meteorologist, the other went to Stanford and owns a restaurant. But their housing situation had always stayed with me. We were not rich by any means. If my mom had money left from her paycheck every 2 weeks, we would go to McDonald's. There were a lot of times that she wasn't hungry and only I would get something. Sometimes we weren't able to go. We always seemed to have money to help her projects though. I sometimes resented it before that day. It turns out that we didn't have a lot of money to throw around because my parents were on a very strict budget. They saved every penny they could so they wouldn't have to worry about money later in life. We always had just enough because anything extra was going into investments. When I was in law school I wanted to flip houses with a couple of buddies. My parents loaned me the money to buy into the group. We would go into neighborhoods and buy as many houses on a block as we could because a street full of nice houses has a greater ROI than one nice house on a crappy street. One day, I found myself standing in the twins' house, and as I pulled the carpet back I saw a really crappy patch job where the hole used to be. I talked to my partners and we decided to keep 6 of the 12 houses on that block. When we started buying the next block we offered to move 6 families into the newly renovated houses for no increase in rent. We continued to do this in and around my mom's old school. The test scores have gone up. Parental involvement has gone up. And, even though the demographics of the neighborhood have changed, there is a strong sense of community. When I sold my portion of the business to my partners I had 94 houses with people living in them that could never afford such a home otherwise. A few years ago, a new kid started in my class mid-year. He was the cutest, sweetest kiddo who had lost his 2 front teeth and smiled with his whole face. He seemed to be focused on pleasing his teachers and trying to be the first to do things correctly to earn praise. He was easy to love and made friends fast. A couple of weeks in, he had a disagreement with another kid and had an outburst, which seemed completely out of character. I called the parent number one had, and it was his stepmother, who said she and his dad had recently gotten custody, and he was acclimating to living with them and his step-siblings, and after coming from a violent household, he was exhibiting more of those behaviors at home, hitting, fighting, breaking things, etc. She was talking like I knew the full story, saying things like, "We are trying to just love him through this." So I interrupted her politely and she said, "Oh, you didn't know? Did you see that story on the news last month about the mom who knocked her kid's teeth out on the way to school and dropped him off with a bloody uniform? That's him." She told me about more of what he'd been through, and then she cried and thanked me for caring. When she hung up, I cried. And then I went home and cried again when I told my husband, because I had seen that story on the news weeks before and was heartbroken and angry. But meeting the kid that way, it just really got me. I taught preschool, 3-year-olds. I got a new student who was in her grandparents' care because she had been molested/raped by her mother's boyfriend. She had all kinds of issues, obviously, because she didn't know how to comprehend what happened to her and how to deal with it. She was so damn smart and funny and great, but at the same time had violent outbursts. Hearing a 3-year-old try to describe sex acts that happened to her was one of the most devastating experiences of my life. My girlfriend has a 4-year-old and admittedly I call her my daughter to others but not in front of her, yet so I don't confuse the little lady, since her real dad is strung out. However, she knows I love her dearly. But I would fucking kill myself before I ever even thought of touching her inappropriately. What the fuck is wrong with people, and how the hell does a 3-year-old have anything sexually appealing about them? I'd fucking murder someone without hesitation if they ever touched her like that. I had a student that I taught in 7th grade, and he was my friend's, the librarian, student aide in 8th grade who had horrible hygiene, and he was often bullied for it. For his birthday we decided to create a shaving kit for him. We filled it with cologne, soaps, a razor and other items. We ordered a pizza and we decorated, closed the library, and had a small party to celebrate him. When he opened his gift he started to cry. At first we thought it was happiness, but it quickly escalated to sobs. We thought we offended him and began to apologize. Through his sobs we finally made out. I thought it would make him stop. We looked at each other and gently asked what he meant. Slowly the story emerged that his father had been sexually abusing him since he was 5, and he thought if he made himself as gross as possible his dad would stop. By law we had to call Child Protective Services and we explained that to him. As I went to do that my friend tried to console him. As it was his birthday his mom showed up to pick him up early, arriving just after CPS. The caseworker let her in the room and the first words she said were, "Couldn't you just hold on for 3 more months?" It seemed she knew what was happening and was getting her LPN so they could move out. She had not worked before. This sad story does have a happy-ish ending. CPS in conjunction with our school social worker found them a shelter so they could stay together. The father was convicted and sent to prison where he was eventually stabbed to death. Asterisk, I should have explained that mom was regularly beaten and told that she and son would be killed if they tried to leave. I'm not in any way excusing her behavior, just putting in the context. 7th grade student lost an older brother to a drive-by. After a few months I was told they had lost 2 other siblings the same way a few years earlier in elementary school. 3 years down the line and his name was in the local newspaper for killing an 11th grade boy for his gang. That year I had the 11th grade boy's little sister in my class. What a terrible cycle. You reminded me of my story. That's a breaking the gang cycle story. Fortunately, I had a student as a 7th grader who wasn't a bad kid, Paresi, but as the year progressed, became a real piece of work. He became a big troublemaker and made a point to be disrespectful in class, but was so frustrating. because he was very smart and a genuinely nice kid one-on-one. I contacted his single mom when I started seeing these problems to find out if there was anything I could do to better support him and figure out what was happening. He immediately improved. About a week later I contacted mom to tell her about the improvement. She said, "I just lost my older son to gang violence and I'm not about to lose he too. He's too damn smart and I'm not going to watch him get into that crap. I'll kick his ass myself so I don't have to watch a thug do it." I asked him about it and sure enough his older brother had just been killed in a gang related shooting. I now have him as a freshman and he is easily one of my favorite students. I know he has a great future lined up for himself. The cycle sometimes can break. I teach 4th grade and 2 years ago, the students at our school read enough books to spin this reward wheel that we have. It landed on eat fried worms. I embraced my role as the young popular teacher, so of course I ate a giant live worm in front of the whole school. After that, this little girl used to stop me at lunch and she would just say in a super disgusted voice, "Ooh, you ate a worm." So after that I started going up to her each day at lunch and looking at her food and asking her where the worms were, and we would bicker back and forth. This continued into last year, and one day we got done with our routine and one of the paraprofessionals stopped me and thanked me. She told me that that student had been molested on multiple occasions by her mom's various boyfriends. She said that she never saw the girl smile as much as she did when we talked about worms together for that brief moment each day. I broke down outside the cafeteria after she told me that. I just hate to believe that someone could do something so awful to a kid. She told me she wanted to be in my class when she got to 4th grade and I hoped she would be. She moved at the end of last year. I never even knew her name and that's what kills me. I wish I would have asked her name. Edit. I just want to thank everyone for the kind words. I hadn't thought to check a yearbook, and I have no idea why. We keep extra copies in our media center, and I'm going to check today. As far as the paraprofessional sharing that information, I don't want to justify her doing so, but it might help to know that she was older and close to retirement and she no longer works at my school. Teacher here. I work with emotionally disturbed teens. Last year was my first year, and I had one female student who was the first kid in her family to graduate from high school. Sweet girl, smart, and always worked hard. I worked hard to get her into college on a full ride. She had a lot of demons in her life. Mom is a drug user, sister was as well, and she was dating an abusive boyfriend. About 3 months before the end of the school year she disappeared. Mom left a voicemail while very high, saying she hasn't seen her in a few weeks. I somehow get a hold of her on the phone, and she was whispering. Her boyfriend in the background was screaming at her. She told me she wasn't coming back. About a week later the police showed up to my class asking when we last saw her if we had any recent photos. They can't say why, but mom was as high as a kite. I get a call later that night asking if I could come down to the station and identify her because mom is refusing. She was beaten to death by her boyfriend to the point she was barely recognizable. I threw up in the trash can after seeing a photo of her. She was 17 and killed by her boyfriend who left her body on the side of the road. Mom died a few days later and no one was left to bury her. It was a reality check working with her. So bright and had a future, but she was a victim of her environment. Not a teacher, but I volunteered in an after-school program that tutored kids. My group was 14 to 15 years old. So, I have this extremely bright kid in my group. When we talk about anything else it was clear that he was super smart. When we did homework together he was doing great and understood everything perfectly. He even helped the other kids. However, he would fail every single one of his tests. And not just a few mistakes here and there on a few subjects. No. He totally completely failing every classes. It didn't make sense at all, so there had to be something else going on. I talked to my supervisor about it, and he promised me to look into it. Turn out his older brother had been held back, and they were in the same classes. The father would beat up the younger one every time he had better marks than his older brother because Yo was making the true A look bad. That the reason that my grade 12 student was falling asleep during math class was because he was working 40 hours a week to pay his parents' bills. I saw his pay stub. He was a great kid too. One of my ed professors told us a story about a student that fell asleep every day. She told us that she found out years later it was because the student had to stay up all night because one of the parents would molest a younger sibling if everyone was asleep, trying to keep it vague for obvious reasons. Edit. This is getting a lot of attention. Things like this happen all the time. Teachers have limited power and training and can only do so much. I encourage everyone to get involved with their local school district. You don't have to have a kid in the district to go to board meetings and ask questions and give input. I've been in education for 2 years. Some say that we can change the world, and some say that's unreasonable. There's a happy medium in there somewhere. If we can change even one person's life for the better, then we've changed their whole world. Reddit, let's do it. Let's work hard to change as many worlds as possible. Thank you so much for watching the whole video. Please leave a like and subscribe.